That's the question that speakers ask, and everybody just looks at you like, okay, well, I guess that's about right. I appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. Those of you that had no idea what's coming, thank you for still being here as well. But I really appreciate Chad and Andrew both for extending the invitation to be a part of this series. I went through and I watched a couple of the folks that you guys have had before, and it's an incredible lineup. You guys have really had some very rich teaching going on this summer, and I appreciate. Whoops, hot mic. And I appreciate that just for my own study. Lonnie in particular, and Ryan Frazier, and then I believe last week was Colton Shannon. Some of the things that they've mentioned, we'll touch on a little bit tonight as well with our topic regarding how to talk to my child, to my teenager, or excuse me, to my kids about social media. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Jason, and my role at Madison is media outreach. I've done that for the last 4 years, and for the 10 years prior to that, I was in youth ministry at Madison. So tonight, I don't come as an expert in any field. I come as a father of 3 kids, 6.5, 4.5, and 2.5, because we're still in that stage where you have to really show the half birthdays as much as you do the whole birthdays. I have a daughter and 2 boys in that order, descending order there. So the 10 years in youth ministry in particular is really what's going to come out tonight, some of those observations, and then some of the things that we're trying to accomplish with our kids right now. We're in that beginning phase of some of these conversations, even with as young as 6 and 4. The idea that we're going to really try to drive home tonight is that growing up, I don't know how it was for you, but we always heard about the talk, right? And that was the talk regarding sex, and it was birds and bees and other things that were kind of confusing, and as a kid didn't really make a lot of sense, but there was sort of one talk that it all centered around. And the older I've become, the more I really don't like that because I don't think that there's any just one conversation. I think our goal as parents is to cultivate more conversation at each age and have the conversation on a level where they can receive it as much as they can and create a relationship where they're willing to come back, and we want them to come to us for answers. So as we get into our study tonight, we'll talk first about kind of how we got to where we are in 2021. I consider where we are now the exponential era of life. So here we have the printing press, roughly 1440s. So thousands of years we had papyrus, and not just the real fun like Bible song font papyrus, but actually things were handwritten, written on caves, things like that. We get to 1440, and our good friend Mr. Gutenberg creates the printing press, and from there technology goes crazy, rampant. Papers are printed and distributed all over the place. And they still print, and we're still printing. For hundreds of years, we're printing. For about 500 years, the printing press is the major capstone of technology when it comes to getting information out quickly. We move on to 1940s, and we have computers that are roughly the size of a room. So it takes us about 500 years to get there. And then from 500 years, we go down to, roughly 40 years. Around somewhere in the 80s, we get some personal-sized computers that are desktop size, closer to what we have today as the modern computer. And then from there, we go to the the smartphone era. We say 2007, and I'm sorry, Android folks, iPhone, that's generally kind of held as sort of 2007 was when smartphones became kind of the norm. They took a hold in the market and never looked back. And iPhone and Android, they've been going back and forth ever since. But if you look, we went in increments of thousands of years to get to 1440. And then we went over the period of hundreds of years to get from 1440 to 1940. And then we went about 40 years, and we went about 30 years. The point here is that technology used to move incrementally. But since the invention of the computer, and specifically the internet, technology now moves exponentially. And as a parent, that's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And to be quite frank with you, I don't think that we can keep up with everything. It's just impossible. The moment I would present to you my top 5 apps that kids you need to be aware of, tomorrow there will be a brand new one on the market somewhere that I don't know about. And so with that being the case, I don't want this to be a night of doom and gloom and just defeatism. I want us to understand that we don't have to teach specific apps only. We teach principles and concepts. We teach how to think, how to apply the Bible to our lives. We don't just teach a specific action. In youth ministry, we tried to have a general dress code. on trips. And at one point, when Nike running shorts came out right at the beginning, they were very popular. They were the bane of every youth minister's existence. And so we actually got to the point where we're like, listen, this is ridiculous. First of all, any shorts don't need to be rolled 7 times. If they need to be rolled 7 times, you need to get a different size. That's just it. But people would come, and I'm not limiting this to girls. We had guys too. It was a very unusual time. But we put on packing lists, no Nike running shorts. We started off saying no short shorts, and then these just kind of kept popping. So we got specific. We said no running shorts, specifically Nike running shorts. Well, then they would show up with the same style and still rolled 14 times, and they said, well, it's not Nike. Okay, so we had the wrong approach because we specified a brand when really what we wanted them to understand was a concept. And I think that's very important for us to understand tonight. When we're talking about social media, first of all, your kids don't call it social media. They call it TikTok or Snapchat. They talk about a specific app. They don't talk social media. That's what us old people talk about. So as you're conversing with them, keep that in mind. In some instances, it's really good to use their language. In other instances, it's really good for them to learn how you think as an adult. Just a quick show of hands. If you have teenagers, say 13 and older, would you mind raising your hand? Okay. If you have kids 12, like 6 to 12. Okay. Younger than 6? That's great. A younger audience than I anticipated. That's really good news because you're a little bit ahead of the game. Being aware of some of these things. Our parents back home that have teenagers are now in the midst of what didn't we do? Because we've talked for years about a new generation of teenagers, and there's always a new book that comes out with every new generation. You know, the millennials, what do we do with them? Now Gen Zers, which by the way, just for clarification, I think I'm among my people. For maybe the other folks that are not among my people, millennials, we got mortgage payments now, all right? So all of your aggravations and frustrations, that's Gen Z that you're actually directing that frustration towards. So we can unite in that frustration. I don't get them, they're weird, I get it. But they have grown up in a weird place. Gen Z kids, actually, born 1996 and later, were the very first generation that had social media accounts in middle school. I can't go to my mom and dad and say, hey, so how did you manage me with social media? Like, how did you manage my screen time? Well, we just turned the TV off. When I was really young, they just took the aluminum foil off the rabbit ears, and that, you ain't getting nothing. It's very different today. So not only do we have to raise a new generation of teenagers, what we forget oftentimes to specify is that we also have to create a new generation of parents. And if you're a millennial and you have children, congratulations, we are actually the best equipped generation of parents to deal with what we're dealing with right now because we grew up with some form of technology all throughout our house. The question here is, are you a digital parent? If you are a parent, then the answer is yes, you are a digital parent. Or at the very minimum, you need to at least understand digital parenting because it's going to be a part of your kid's life forever. It's going to be a part of our families forever. And so it's best for us to navigate here. One of the greatest things that you guys have going for you here at Columbia is you have a Chad Landman on staff. A Chad Landman is a wonderful resource. Chad was a resource during the pandemic for a lot of guys like me who were scrambling to try to figure out what we needed to do to maintain connection for our people, to make sure that we had a presence online, because in a time when we couldn't be physically in the same room, digital presence was the only presence we had. Utilize Chad. I would encourage you, and he didn't tell me to say this, but take him out to lunch and pick his brain. You're welcome for that part. You can pay me later for that. There we go. Take him out to lunch, sit down with him, have conversations with him about what are the things that he's seeing in trends. He's very in tune to tech trends, and we need people like that. We need people that understand things that we don't understand and that can teach us to be more effective as parents. So I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Are you a digital parent? Yes, you are. And here's proof. This was a 2018 Pew Research study that came out, and the percentage of 13 to 17-year-olds. 13-year-olds are in what, 7th, 8th grade, roughly? They're children still. 69%, almost 3/4 of those polled had a Snapchat account. 72% had an Instagram. And this is interesting. 51% had Facebook, because that's where us old people hang out, on Facebook. 32 had Twitter. That's where us old people get our news now. It's Twitter. 85% were on YouTube. The interesting thing here, 85, 94%, everybody's on YouTube. YouTube's got something for everybody. My 2-year-old will sit there and watch kids play with slime for hours on end. He doesn't, and my 6-year-old too. She's the one that somehow she finds a way to get past codes and stuff. Our kids are so wired to figure out technology. They do it better than we do, even when we actually research sometimes. So it's a little bit frightening. Also, it's frightening to be mesmerized by slime for hours on end. I don't get it. I'm sure we had weird things growing up, but I don't think it was that weird. Anyway, I'm not here just to bash my kids. The percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds. Look at that. Twitter, 45%. Everything else is over 70%. And this is in 2018. You think those numbers have gone up or down since COVID? When everything we did went online. Now that schools supply iPads, they supply laptops. We're Monrovian Elementary School this year. This is our first year at big school for our 6-year-old in first grade. And they have reading time. Reading time consists of a Chromebook. They have games and math that they learn on a Chromebook. There's a screen there at all times. So these numbers, I don't see them going down at all anytime soon. We're now at a point where we're getting science and data to study what has happened over the last 20 and 30 years. The reason I can't go to my parents and ask them about what I was like when I was on social media at 12 is because it didn't exist. When you talked about apps, your choices were cheese sticks or chips and salsa, because it was short for appetizers, right? It wasn't, apps weren't a thing then, but they are now. And so we need to understand what they are, how they operate, and we got to stay relentless. And that's the part that's just unfair. It's just unfair because it is overwhelming. But when we start to look at the science, we start to understand what's going on in our kids' lives and then what's going on in the culture around us, every generation of parents has had to do something unfair, and that is figure it out. There are concepts that transcend generation, but there are some specific things that are unique to every new generation. So the science here, the dopamine reward loop, this is nothing new at all. Dopamine is the drug, the chemical that's in our brain that highlights pleasure. It's something that is extremely powerful, and it's something that can be manipulated in frightening ways. When we hear people talk about the opioid epidemic, what they're really talking about is the dopamine epidemic. It applies here to your phone. You pick up your phone, you've got a notification. You don't have to raise your hand, but how many people in here cannot stand to have a notification on their email? Okay, you're probably about to run away. I have over 1,400 emails. Yeah, that I have not, yep, see, she just admitted to it. I apologize. There may be some marriage counseling that may need to happen on the way home. I know. Yeah, you just don't look at it, right? Yeah, it's fine. Some of those I've read, but most of them I haven't. 1,400 unread. Most people can't handle that. After it gets past like 7, then I'm like, yeah, whatever. If it's around 7, then I'll get rid of them. But the people that created these apps know that. And that's why you get an app every now. That's why you get a random notification from some random game that's asking you, saying, hey, your friend just started playing. You should come back to the game. I haven't looked at that in months. Yeah, we know. That's why we're just tapping you on the shoulder. Because when you look at your phone, it's like going to the mailbox, opening it up, and there's not a bill. There's a handwritten letter. There is no greater feeling than to have an actual piece of mail that you look forward to opening, right? Probably hadn't happened in a few weeks. Not so much in our house. But when it does happen, you get that same rush of excitement. Well, that's dopamine. And so when you look at your phone and you go and you've got a notification, what's even better is it was a like or it was a mention or it was a comment on something you posted. That dopamine increases in your brain. You feel happy. And then it decreases. And just like a drug, you got to go back to get more to maintain the dose. See, dopamine is not something that has longevity. It's released and then it decreases. It's a flow. It's not a steady presence. And so these app creators, they know that. And they leverage that. And they're fairly open about some of that. So the epidemic really that we're facing is the dopamine epidemic, because that transcends whether it's a narcotic, whether it's a controlled substance, or whether it's technology. And this is not limited to phones. This could be tablets, this is computers, this is television. We started seeing that when I was growing up with video games. And it's interesting. I was talking with one of our parents of teens, which his kids are now grown out of college. But he talked about growing up and spending hours on end at Aladdin's Castle, at the arcade. We did that when I was younger. And then the arcade came home. And we got something called Sega Channel. And then we had cartridges in our Nintendos. Remember doing that in and out, trying to get the special way, just got to get it just right. Well, we had the arcade in our house. And that was another step. We got one step away from incremental and one step towards exponential, because it went to a channel then that you could download stuff. And now we stream everything. We don't even have to go anywhere, interact with a human. We don't have to go and see another person face to face to get pornography. Not only is it in our homes, it stays in our pocket throughout the day. So we can look at it at lunch. We can look at it sitting in traffic, sitting at a stoplight. We can gossip whenever we want without actually feeling the brunt of what it does to someone. Everything that is positive about social media also has a danger. And I want to speak with balance tonight because my title's Media Outreach, so without it, I ain't got a job. But there are some really big positives that come from having social media. The last year, we were more equipped to endure a global pandemic than we've ever been as far as humanity goes, because of technology, because of social media specifically. You can get word out quickly. I remember when the tornadoes came through the Huntsville area back in 2011, we had internet before we had cell phone coverage. So we could send mass messaging of what we needed supplies-wise to people, to let people know. I mean, you log on to Facebook, you know someone's checked in during a hurricane, or during an earthquake, or during a tornado, or during a flood. You know they're okay. That peace of mind is invaluable. So what we're trying to do is to navigate these blessings that are two-edged swords, this technology that allows things that are actually kingdom expanding. We can go into all the world from Columbia, Tennessee now in a way that we've never been able to before. Our teaching reaches all. Last 2 Sundays ago, we had someone comment on our live stream at Madison that was in Tanzania, someone that was in Saskatchewan, Canada, someone else somewhere else in Africa, I can't remember, and then someone else in India. There's no way they do that without technology, without YouTube. So there are some blessings there. But this epidemic we also need to be aware of. Technology now advances faster than character develops. And this is where the danger lies. Because this is not exclusive to children and to teenagers. Technology advances faster than character can develop. This is going back to the science of what we know. We know that the frontal lobe, we know that prefrontal cortex is one of the last portions of the brain to develop. And it doesn't develop until sometimes well into our 20s. For some of my friends growing up, I'm not sure it's still developed. I question myself sometimes, but that's the last portion. And it's so important because that is the part of the brain that determines decision making and fully understands consequences. Would you give a 3-year-old a loaded gun? No. Would you put the loaded gun in close proximity to the 3-year-old and say, now listen, I want you to understand that this is dangerous and you don't need to play with this, and then proceed to set it down right next to them? No. Because they don't fully understand those kinds of concepts. A toddler doesn't know that the stove is hot sometimes until the toddler touches the stove with his hand. With the gun, you keep it locked up safe away from a 3-year-old because they can't handle it at this point. We have a loaded atomic bomb in our devices. There is not a 100% safe social media app out there. Why? Because people are on social media apps. The two can't coexist. There can't be perfect safety and humans still be there. Doesn't exist. This idea that character has to be present is something that is very difficult for young people to understand. They're trying to decide who they are. They're trying to figure out why this zit appeared today when I've got to go talk to a pretty girl. They're trying to understand why their voice does this every other day when mom says eventually it's going to go away. I'll let you know if it ever does. There's a lot going on inside the body and the mind of a 7-year-old. There's even more going on inside the mind of a 13-year-old. Maybe debatable, maybe less going on, but chemically there's more going on in there that they understand than we understand. And that's why sometimes as parents we lose our cool and eventually come back and realize I had an unreasonable reaction because you are still just a child. So instead of saying act your age, maybe we should say stop acting your age. We really want you to act older. This is very important. We're going to come back to this idea of character development. As parents, we are in the business of stewardship and cultivation. And this goes back to the first thing I said about we're not just trying to teach a specific behavior. We are trying to steward our relationship with our children. We don't own them. Any one of us, the sad truth is, on the way home tonight, could lose our children, could lose our spouse. We don't have ownership of any relationship we have. We have ownership of nothing. It takes a quick natural disaster for us to understand we don't actually own our home. We don't own our stuff. We are given blessings and relationships and opportunity in this life to steward, not to own. It belongs to God. We're here to use these things for His glory. So we are here to raise children, to steward that relationship, to steward our relationship to them in a way that brings glory to God and grows His kingdom. We're here to cultivate relationships with them and to cultivate conversations with them. We're trying to cultivate in their hearts a love for God, an understanding of why a life that is spiritual is worth living. Now, the challenge to that is that even in our limits that we put on children, we limit where they can go, what they can do, who they can be around. We limit when they can start driving, how often they can drive, the times they can drive. There's still limits to our limitations. I'll give you an example of this that happened just a few weeks ago. Our oldest daughter was playing across the street with one of the neighbor's kids. Great girl, really sweet family. They played in their front yard, so we can kind of see them from our house. That's kind of our rule. We make sure we know where you are, kind of deal. And my wife went over to get all three of our kids to bring them back for dinner. When she got over there, she heard a voice as she was approaching the driveway there. They were playing in the garage. It was open. And she looked around, and she didn't see a person, but they were all huddled around the girl, our friend. And they were looking at an iPad. And she was talking to a friend that she had gone to school with from last year. We have no idea who that kid is. Our kids aren't allowed to spend really any time on tablets or phones. If they get our phones somehow, we take it from them. We try to really, really limit that. We specifically don't do a lot of communication over the phone, over a tablet, especially with someone we don't know. But they wouldn't be on our limits because it was offered to them in the moment. They weren't being bad kids. They weren't being defiant kids. They were being kids. And their friend was probably talking to a really good kid, but I have no idea who that child is. So I say this to give us realistic expectations that sometimes even our limitations have limits as far as effectiveness. So one, we need to understand that when they disappoint us. And two, we need to understand that we are not capable of coming up with every possible scenario and teaching that specific scenario. That's why I keep coming back. We're teaching concepts. We're trying to cultivate a desire for holiness. We're trying to create culture in our homes that run towards godliness and run from worldliness. Those are sometimes kind of different. One is task-oriented, and the other one is relationship-oriented, and it cultivates a maturity there. So there are limits to our limitations. Our thoughts matter. Our thoughts matter quite a bit. And if you have your scriptures with you, I'd ask you to open up Proverbs 12, verse 5. We'll run through these quickly, but just to show you how the Bible talks about what we think about. Proverbs 12:5, the thoughts of the righteous are just, the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. Colossians 3 and verse 2, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. Romans 12 verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Philippians 4 and verse 8, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It matters what you think about. It matters what our kids think about. I brought a couple of resources that I'll share with you here in just a moment, and one of the things I was reading actually just today, an excerpt in there, talked about a group of kids that suffer from a dysphoria caused by gaming, where they game for hours on end, and specifically Minecraft, which is a generally harmless game. Unless you're just not a fan of squares and cubes, then it's fine. But these kids play it for hours on end, young ages, 5, 6 years old. And then they can't sleep because when they do fall asleep, they're seeing these images of cubes over and over again. They wake up and they actually see, almost like when if you blacked out before, something like a kaleidoscope, well, they see these shapes and they have this dysphoria that just pops up. Teenagers will often talk about, another study I read actually for college students, it was undergraduates, said like 91% of undergraduates polled in this particular survey talked about having phantom phone vibrations in their leg. don't know if you've ever experienced that, but man, I know my phone just went off. Pull it up, nope, nothing. No dopamine now. Put it back in your pocket. But you feel something that's actually not there. So it happens on a young level, it happens on an old level. What we put into our minds and what we actively and intentionally think about makes a huge difference. So as we are cultivating the minds of our children, as we are trying to teach them how to think about the world, we want to be putting into their minds godly things, spiritual things, things that we want them to marinate on, so to speak. We want them to think about all the time, not cubes, not football, not earthly things. So we got to think about ways that we can do that we can accomplish creating thought habits for them. As we talked about here, we want to cultivate a culture of character. Character is something that we just don't see a lot of when it comes to media, when it comes to the world, right? Character is not really the first, maybe a character that is really popular on TikTok. TikTok, the ability, really social media in general, if I think back, when I was in college is when Facebook came out. At that time it was called thefacebook.com, and you had to have a .edu email address to have an account. Oh, the good old days. Then everybody got on there, right? When it first came out, I refused for like 2 weeks, because before it came out, you could walk by the computer lab, and there were maybe 1 or 2 people in there on any given night. After it hit Faulkner, you couldn't find a seat. You would have to wait to get a computer, because people, and they had the ones that were down like this, so terrible posture, you're just doing this the whole time. You walk in, and there's a whole room of 30 people just staring down at the glass screen. And it was like all of your elementary and high school yearbooks came to life online. You got to reconnect with people. It was amazing. And then I watched the divorce happen via Facebook status. And that was hard to comprehend. And then I heard stories of marriages that were on the rocks because old high school flames had been rekindled with innocent likes. And back then, poke was a thing, just a creepy idea from the beginning. But I won't tell you, I had a 3.5-year running poke with a friend. Anyway, it was a weird time again. College, prefrontal cortex had not developed, clearly. But things happen that are outside of our control. You see, the thing with social media is that things that happen in a vacuum get scaled immediately and without you. It's like back in the day when you were told don't have a party at your house, because when you invite 2 or 3 friends and they invite 2 or 3 friends, and if your parents are out of town, they know that, then the whole school shows up. It's in every coming of age comedy from the late 90s. That's kind of the scenario there. Well, social media scales quickly, and we've seen that with every celebrity meltdown over the last 15, 20 years. We have to cultivate a culture of character. We have to do that in our churches. We have to do that in our homes, in our relationships. Think of it not as teaching a specific task, but cultivating a culture. The talk, we mentioned this earlier. The talk is not just the talk, it's the talks, it's conversations. So that leads us, we want to cultivate a culture of conversation. You want your kids to come to you for answers, and especially if you have young children right now. My wife and I experienced this 2 nights ago. Our daughter, every time she comes home from school or when I get home, hey, tell me about your day, and it's usually, I forgot. I don't think you did, but okay, we play that game for a little while, and then eventually I get a little bit, yeah, we colored a piece of paper. Okay, anything else? Yeah, I forgot. So you play that game. I'm sure it's familiar for a lot of us. Well, then it's time for bed, and it's like just vomit the day, like we did this and we did that. I'm like, go to sleep. And I really struggle because 1, she needs her sleep. 2, I need her to have her sleep. But that's a time when she's willing to talk. And that's a time when I probably need to be more willing to listen, because I want them to come to me with questions. I do genuinely want to know about their day. I want to know who they're friends with, not just in a private investigator sort of way. I want to know what my kids are like when I'm not around. I want to know where we are in this whole parenting thing. And so when they're willing to talk, be willing to listen. It's really difficult sometimes because they know how to push those buttons, right? But again, we're trying to cultivate. When you cultivate something, 1 instance is not the litmus test for anything. When you cultivate something, you're talking big picture, more long term. So we got to keep that at the forefront of our minds. We want to cultivate a culture of discipline. And this is where the question of, well, when can my kid have a social media account comes into play. How many of us know adults that should never, ever be allowed to have a, Twitter handle? Never, ever be allowed to have any kind of social media where you can publicly interact with the whole world? How many celebrities, athletes, politicians, leaders, how many old people, right? There's no old people in here, so we're all safe. We can talk freely. How many people that are adults that you see something cringeworthy, you're like, you really just don't need to have access to that. Well, so we're going to let 12-year-olds have at it, 7-year-olds have at it, 22-year-olds. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that there is an answer for that. But if we're trying to cultivate character and then we give them the keys to the world and say, have at it, and we really initiate access to all the evil the world has to offer, there's a little bit of mirror looking that needs to go on there. How many of us have made a post or typed something or a comment we just really probably should have put that toothpaste back in the tube? But you can't. And now we're talking exponential impact. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find dozens, if not maybe even hundreds at this point, instances of teenagers, articles written about teenagers that maybe took a picture of themselves and texted it to their boyfriend. The boyfriend then shared it with the whole baseball team. The whole baseball team gets to the whole school. There was one that a friend of mine shared several years back, and this is when the idea of sexting first came out. And this girl had done just that, and to the point where she actually transferred schools. And she transferred out of the district. Well, the next school year, she was trying out for what I think it was soccer, and she was there at tryouts, and she noticed a group of girls kind of laughing, and then they kind of look up at her, and she'd look over, and they'd look away, and she eventually got up there closer to them, and one girl came and said, "Hey, is this you?" And it was the picture that she had sent her boyfriend now a year ago in a whole other part of the state. It followed her. She eventually took her life because she couldn't get away from it. We do dumb stuff when we're kids. We say dumb things, even as adults, things we wish we could take back. But now the opportunity for those things to follow us everywhere haunts young children. Combine that with the fact that we are, since the millennial generation has come on, a thing called delayed adolescence, which means essentially that the older we are, the more we mature older than we used to. So think about 1944, we were sending 16, 17-year-old guys over to fight for our country, and now they're wearing skinny jeans. I don't know how they put their phone in it kind of thing. Like, it's a different variety of human these days. Delayed adolescence combined with earlier access. There is nothing new under the sun. I believe Ecclesiastes when it says there's nothing new under the sun. The sins are the same that our parents dealt with, our grandparents dealt with, but the access to those sins are completely different and wide open. And the access to more sin at a time when you are more immature is a horrible recipe, which means parents have to be vigilant and diligent. You own the phone. You 100% own the phone. It's your property, and you have free reign to look. Ronald Reagan had some great advice once upon a time: trust but verify. Because we're trying to cultivate not a culture of spying, but a culture where we are stewarding our children's souls. We're trying to teach them discipline. We want to teach and to model our purpose. Our purpose is to glorify God and to grow His kingdom. I'm going to go through these next ones real fast. These come from a webpage that I'll share at the very end. One thing that social media does, it makes the trivial seem urgent. And by doing so, 75. 75, man. I know, right? Pow! It explodes.
Turn it off.
Just turn it off. There you go. Just throw the phone in the river. It's not even worth it, man. Can't catch up to 75 notifications. But when we get a little notification like that, it means instantly it needs my attention. When really, it just meant that somebody posted about a water skiing squirrel. That's not worth my time. When it's bedtime, my kids need to see my eyes looking at their eyes, not at my phone. And I'll be honest, that's a big struggle sometimes. That's a big struggle. The trivial seems urgent when it comes to social media. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. We are not at war with physical things. We are at war with spiritual things. And our kids need to know that. It also weaponizes fear and anxiety. And can I just say the year 2020, right? all over the place. Philippians 4:6, not to be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power and love. There's a movie that I would recommend to you, we'll get to that one second. We'll go one more slide. It encourages constant social comparison. And this is one of the most unhealthy facets of social media, specifically for girls. Do a quick Google search when you get home on the rise of depression and anxiety in teenage girls. It will blow your mind. It will break your heart. God created us not to be in constant comparison with other people. Our standard is Christ. But social media puts out, and we can have a whole series on just this one alone. It puts out these false, filtered, planned, staged, unrealistic moments, snapshots of life. And our kids are completely consumed by it. I'll take it one step further. We are completely consumed by it. When you've got 7 friends that have been to Disney World in the last 2 weeks and they're all posting at the same time, as a parent, you're like, man, I'm doing something wrong. We got to go to Disney, right? That pressure is not limited to teenagers. Oh, they're doing this. Well, we need to do that for our kids. Because I know my kid's going to talk to their kid and they're going to want to do it. Well, now I just resent that person. Unfriend, unfollow, mute. Social media it just gets in there and it changes all of our wiring. Not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Social media has a way of taking away our contentedness. It takes away the stillness that we have. Are we led by the flesh or are we led by the Spirit? Social media can be leveraged to glorify God. Social media is also an extremely effective tool of Satan. Kind of like people. Kind of like us, right? Character over celebrity, 1,000%. This is something that our kids need to know and need to understand. Character needs to be developed and cultivated. As parents, we need to steward these relationships, these opportunities that we have with our kids. I want to leave you with a few resources that I found very helpful. TechWise Family, Screens and Teens, and Glow Kids. These are 3 books that have some really good information. They have a lot more stats in there as well. They also have some practical ways to restructure your family dynamic to kind of help and I guess buffer yourself, buffer your family from creating some trends that lead down dangerous roads. And then this is a movie that was very popular during 2020. It was one of the most watched documentaries on Netflix. It is only on Netflix currently, so I apologize for that part of it. If you don't have Netflix, I would still encourage you, find someone who does, another set of parents or another parent, and watch it. It does have some language in there. It is a documentary put together. I don't know how they were able to make this. They have people that were the architects of the social networking structure we have today. People that started Uber, people that started Google, people that helped start, the guy that helped create the like button on Facebook, people that started Pinterest. They're all being interviewed, and they're not promoting those things. They tell us exactly what the algorithms are written to do and to accomplish and how they do that. If I can go into Publix and Publix can convince me that I need to buy Lucky Charms because they direct me to the right and then they direct me down that aisle and Lucky Charms is right where my kids can see it, then people that create our social and networking platforms can have us do whatever they want us to do. This is the group that this is a website platform that came out of that. I would highly recommend you spend time on this tonight. Center for Humane Technology. They have a lot of great resources. On here, they have a Chrome extension for your web browser. If you use Google Chrome, where it will actually take away the news feed of YouTube videos. The automatic autoplay that comes up, it'd just be nothing there. So instead of spending 45 minutes, you go and watch the 4-minute video you wanted to, and there's nothing there, and so you leave. It's actually very beneficial. I wish I had found it for Facebook earlier in 2020. That would have been really helpful to mute like all the madness that kind of came spewing out during that time. But they've got a lot of resources and a lot of information for you to arm your family and for us to raise a new generation, not just of teenagers, but of parents. I have gone over time and I apologize for that. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'll just say one thing about the social dilemma. You could just, if I knew the minute, I would tell you, if you just watch when they ask them, will your kids have a social media account or do they or whatever, and it was no. The inventors saying this.
Right. You look up Bill Gates, all the big cats, right? They don't let their kids have it. They're saying now, our doctor told us, don't let your newborn baby look at a TV screen even for the first year and a half. The actual components of a television of screens are not healthy at young ages because those wires are being formed, those pathways are being developed, and the synapses are trying to connect. And when they get access to something that they're not supposed to see at that age, it rewires their brain. And so we're talking now a generation of kids that we're literally having to try to rewire how they think. That's why we don't get Gen Zers. And I don't think it's just because I'm at that stay off my lawn phase of life. There's really a different thing going on there. We're seeing the effects of the last 20 or 30 years of technology exponentially increasing. Good, great comment. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight, and thank you for having me. Have a good evening.